Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ryan Paul Johnson with the Fairfax County Department of Transportation, and I want to welcome you to this meeting to discuss the 2026 proposed active transportation roadway restriping projects in Mount Vernon District. Before we begin, I would like to review some guidelines so that everyone can participate and get the most out of this session. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and we will be posted on YouTube and then linked to the web page. Microsoft Teams does offer a live captioning service. You can find that by clicking the three dots at the top of your screen and choosing Turn on Live Captions. Once the presentation is completed, we will begin the question and answering portion during which the participants will ask their questions aloud. The chat feature has been disabled for this meeting, so there will be not we will not be taking any written questions. If you're on the phone, please hold your questions to the end. We will have instructions for you to ask questions at the conclusion of the presentation. We also encourage that you submit your comments to today's meeting using the online survey, feedback form, phone call. Again, we'll address this at the end of the presentation. And before we begin, I want to introduce Supervisor Storks and his staff. And I do believe that we have Angelique here. Angelique, if you would like to say anything, to say hello, that would be greatly appreciated.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. And tonight, our presenter would be Hannah Kackner. She is an active transportation planner two from the Fairfax County Department of Transportation's active transportation team. And she will be presenting the projects that will be working with VDOT on the repavement, the 2026 restriping projects in Mount Vernon. Hannah, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, RP. Yeah, as RP mentioned, I'm an active transportation planner with FCDOT, and tonight I'll be talking about FCDOT's role in VDOT's repaving program and also presenting our proposed striping improvements in Mount Vernon District for 2026. And I will also add that we typically hold these meetings in the spring with VDOT. So I'll also explain why we're doing this earlier this year in my presentation. So I'll just start off with a quick overview of the program, present an overview of our proposed bike lanes and crosswalks, and then we'll move on to the question and answer portion of the meeting. And then after that, I'll go over just some instructions on how to submit feedback on any of the proposed bike lanes and crosswalks. And I'll start off with a quick overview of the program. So each year, VDOT and FCDOT collaborate on providing safety improvements for all roadway users as part of VDOT's annual paving program. And so that process typically begins with FCDOT, our agency, reviewing VDOT's draft paving list in the spring or summer, and then identifying any opportunities for improvements, which can include new crosswalk markings, bike lanes, and road diets. We'll sometimes propose other striping improvements, but those three are definitely the most common that we do. And then from there, our agency develops striping and signage plans for implementation right after the road is repaved. And then we also lead public engagement efforts once striping is complete, we install any associated signage with the new bike lanes and crosswalks. And so, as I mentioned, there have been some recent changes to this program. Typically, public meetings for our proposed bike lanes and crosswalks are held jointly with VDOT in the spring, after VDOT has published their annual repaving list. But after some discussion with VDOT this past year, we decided that it would be better to hold public meetings several months in advance of the 2026 repaving season, just to provide more time to get the striping plans created and to get project approvals through. And so the proposed bike lanes and crosswalks are all on roadways that are currently on VDOT's draft repaving list. Definitely emphasis on the draft there. The final list will not be published until the spring of 2026. So it's very possible that some of these roadways will not end up on that final list. And typically roadways that do not end up on VDOT's final paving list are just deferred for a year or two. So any approved new bike lanes and crosswalks would just be deferred as well and ultimately added when the roadway is repaved, whenever that may be. And yeah, again, just a reminder that each of these projects is still going to be fairly preliminary, and each one will be subject to approval by VDOT, and then also whether or not each roadway ends up on the final paving list, which will be published in the spring, usually in April. So as I mentioned, each year FCDOT and VDOT add a number of new bike lanes through the repaving and restriping program. And a big reason that we do this is to repurpose underutilized roadway space. Many of the roads in Fairfax County were built with wider than necessary travel lanes, or sometimes too many travel lanes than are really needed based on their volumes, which can lead to some safety issues like speeding or inattentive driving. And repaving gives us the opportunity to right size those roadways by narrowing the travel lanes or converting additional travel lanes into bike lanes or center turn lanes at very little cost. And this also helps us implement our planned bicycle network at relatively low cost because it's much less expensive to add new pavement markings when the roadway is already being repaved. Here's an example of bike lanes that were added a couple of years ago through the repaving program on Annandale Road. And as you can see there, you just get a really nice traffic calming effect because the roadway is just visually narrowed. So people feel like they have to slow down. And these are the type of bike lanes that we typically add through the repaving program. Um, We don't usually add sharrows anymore, and we try to add buffered bike lanes wherever possible to give some additional separation between cyclists and vehicles to provide a more comfortable experience. And although this program only allows us to stripe bike lanes, adding the buffer there just gives us the option to add protection to the bike lane in the future by adding physical barriers. But those usually have to come through other funding sources. This diagram shows a categorization of the four types of cyclists we typically see in Fairfax County. And while we're not able to build trails or protected bike lanes through the repaving program, we are trying to provide as many buffered bike lanes as possible where we have space to try to appeal to a broader range of riders. And then I won't spend too much time on this because we have a lot of proposals tonight. But these are just a few benefits of adding bicycle infrastructure. So as you can see, bike lanes really provide benefits to all roadway users, not just cyclists. So moving on to the first of our proposed striping projects, we're proposing to extend the eastbound bike lane on Beacon Hill Road by about 1,000 feet to this segment in green right here. Can you see my mouse, RP? Just want to make sure. If not, I'll turn on the laser pointer.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. Oops. And so we have some existing bike lanes on Beacon Hill already, which are marked in white. And so we would just be making those existing bike lanes more continuous by removing some of the street parking here and adding that one eastbound segment. And one big reason we'd like to make this particular segment a little bit more continuous is because right up here is Richmond Highway, and there are some planned bike lanes as part of the Richmond Highway BRT project that would be really great to provide a connection to. And as I mentioned, in order to make space to extend this bike lane, we would need to remove about 30 parking spaces. But as with all of the proposed projects that would require the removal of parking, we do have a survey that you can take to weigh in on whether or not you would be in favor of removing the street parking along this segment. And so the survey options for Beacon Hill are either to make no changes to the roadway or to remove the parking bay and extend that bike lane by about 1,000 feet. And that survey will help inform Supervisor Stork on whether or not to move forward with our proposed projects. And I will have a link to that at the end of the slideshow. This is just what Beacon Hill looks like Currently, we have a bike lane on this side and then just proposing to remove that parking bay and add a bike lane on this segment here. We did have a consultant perform a parking study on 3 of these roadway segments to help give us some additional insight into the parking utilization along each one of them. Our consultant performed these studies over the course of a week. It was last week, actually, and then counted the number of vehicles parked on each roadway segment 1 to 2 times per day at various set times. And the full parking study is on our website and is also linked in the survey, and we'll have those links for you at the end of the presentation. This corridor had the lowest average parking utilization of all of the roadways that were analyzed at 18% on average. But again, I'll just emphasize that the parking studies are just one piece of information that will be considered when determining whether or not to remove parking and add bike lanes. So we'll really be relying on public feedback for these as well. And then, so we're also proposing to extend the northbound bike lane along Quander Avenue by about a tenth of a mile by removing parking. So that's going to be this segment right here in green, which would require the removal of 11 parking spaces. And then another part of this proposal would be removing a small section of parking up here next to this Oarsman dealership. It's only about 8 spaces, so not too many. And what we be doing there is just adding a buffer to the existing bike lane there. And in the survey, you'll have the choice between either making no changes to the road, removing both parking bays to add the buffer and extend the existing bike lane, or to just remove one of the parking bays to extend the bike lane while preserving the other parking bay. So this first segment here, we'd be proposing to remove this section of street parking, shifting the bike lane closer to the curb, and then adding a buffer so it looks like the bike lane on the other side of the roadway. And then the other portion of Quander, this is where the existing bike lane is, so we'd just be proposing to extend it a bit further where those cars are parked. And so our parking study did show a fairly high utilization rate for both of these parking bays, especially for the parking bay to the south. So this is definitely something that will be considered before moving forward. And again, I just encourage everyone to weigh in on this through our survey. We're also proposing to extend the existing bike lanes on Bellevue Boulevard down to Boulevard View to get a little bit closer to the GW Parkway in anticipation of that planned connection to the Mount Vernon Trail. So doing so would require the removal of about 40 spaces on either side of Bellevue Boulevard. But in the survey, we do also list the option to just add the bike lanes to one side of the roadway to preserve some of the street parking. And of course, the survey also lists the option to just make no changes to the roadway and leave it as is. And so these parking bays here are what would be converted to bike lanes, and they would just be an extension of the bike lanes further to the west on Bellevue Boulevard. And so the parking utilization rate for the portions of Bellevue Boulevard that were analyzed range from about 40% to 65% on average. And then again, we have the full parking study on our webpage, so just be sure to take a look at that if you are interested in seeing more detail on that. And then also proposing extending the existing bike lanes on South Run Road to Acacia Court, which would be added through the removal of street parking. And again, the survey options for this roadway are listed on the slide. So this is what that segment looks like currently, and then those are the existing bike lanes that we would be extending. And then we are also proposing to widen the existing bike lanes on a portion of Telegraph Road between Jeff Todd Way and Hilltop Village Circle. The current bike lanes on that roadway were built to a previous design standard, so they were only about 4 feet wide. So we're proposing to widen them to 6 feet to just better align with the current guidance on bike lane design. And we plan to do this by narrowing the travel lanes to 11 feet, which is pretty standard. Right now, they're a bit wide for a road with those volumes. And we do not have a survey question for this project just because there should not really be any noticeable impact to drivers by narrowing the lanes by foot or by 2 feet, sorry. And so this is kind of what those bike lanes look like right now. So just as you can see, um, pretty narrow compared to most bike lanes that you see now. And then similarly, we're proposing to widen the existing bike lanes on Lorton Road between Hoos Road and Silverbrick Road to 5 feet. The existing bike lanes are pretty spotty, and we did look at extending them. The existing bike lanes are marked in white here, so just a few segments. But yeah, we did look at extending those, but unfortunately there is not enough excess travel lane width to do so without removing any of those travel lanes. And again, very narrow bike lane, especially considering how wide those travel lanes are. We're also able to add new crosswalks through this program, and this year we're proposing to add 5 crosswalks in Mount Vernon District. In order for VDOT to consider adding the crosswalk when they repave, the curb ramps on both approaches to the crosswalk have to meet the current ADA standard. So that sometimes limits us in how many crosswalks we're able to add. And then also we do sometimes need to restrict parking on the approach to the crosswalk, just to ensure that parked vehicles don't block the view of people crossing the street. So our first proposed crosswalk is crossing Beacon Hill Road at Darrow Court, connecting 2 bus stops on either side of the road. There's no street parking on this portion of Beacon Hill, so we would not need to restrict any parking. And then next we have a proposed crosswalk at Beacon Hill Road and Blue Wing Drive, again crossing Beacon Hill Road. And this would provide a marked crosswalk connecting to the Mount Vernon Rec Center. And again, no necessary parking restrictions here either. We are also proposing a crosswalk crossing Bellevue Boulevard and Boulevard View, and that would require us to restrict 10 parking spaces in order to meet those site distance requirements. But we do have a question in the survey that will allow you to weigh in on whether or not you are comfortable with removing those parking spaces. Of course, if the public was in favor of adding the bike lanes on Bellevue Boulevard, those parking spaces would already be restricted. But in case the community is not in favor of adding bike lanes, another option would just be to add the crosswalk. But we still would need to restrict some street parking in order to do that, just based on the state code. And then another proposed crosswalk we have is at South Run Road and then Silverbrook Road, crossing South Run Road. This one's near South County High School and Laurel Hill Elementary School. This one would not require any parking restrictions because there's a stop sign there. And then our final proposed crosswalk that we have is crossing Potomac Avenue at Bellevue Boulevard, and no parking restrictions needed for this one either. And that just about wraps up my presentation for the evening. But before we move on to the question and answer portion of the meeting, I did just want to make a couple of notes on community feedback, how to submit that, and any other questions you may have. So if you have any comments or questions related to paving, drainage issues, missing signage, signal repair, walkway repair, or site distance issues related to like vegetation overgrowth or just vegetation overgrowth in general, those should all be submitted to VDOT. through the My VDOT portal, which is linked here. And then if you need to request road repairs, such as for a pothole, you can follow the I need a road repair link on the VDOT portal or call 1-800-4ROAD. And I also have a link to our repaving webpage up here, which also has a link to the public feedback survey that I mentioned, as well as proposed project scopes. And then a recording of tonight's presentation and the slides that I shared will be posted at some point tomorrow. And then there's some additional information on the paving and striping program there as well. And then also just wanted to add that once the meeting is over, I again just want to emphasize that everyone take our survey and submit feedback on these proposals. Also spread the word about them because the survey and any other comments sent to us will be used to determine which of these projects move forward. So with that, I think we can move on to the question and answer portion. And RP will have some instructions on that.
Okay, we will now take questions and comments for the attendees on on this presentation. You may ask your question verbally by raising your hand, which using that raise hand tool at the top of your screen. I would enable your microphone, call on you to ask your question. Please unmute yourself when your name is called and ask your question or provide a comment. And then please mute yourself once you have provided a comment or question. If you are on the phone, you press *5 to raise your hand. When you're called upon, you will press *6 to unmute yourself. And then after you answer your question or have your comment, you go ahead and press *6 again to mute yourself. Please be patient with people who are on their phones and may be a little bit challenging for them to raise their hand. Okay? And with that, we will go ahead and start taking questions from our attendees.
We can start with Jennifer.
Okay, Jennifer, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and you can begin your question or comment.
Thank you. My main question is, we currently have bike lanes on the lower portion of Beacon Hill Road going down to Bellevue Boulevard. And repeatedly, I'm using the bike lanes and there are people parked in those bike lanes. I call the police asking for them to enforce the bike lanes and they respond maybe whenever they're convenient hours later. If the car is still there, great. Usually it's not still there. I think it's wonderful to add bike lanes, but only if we're going to enforce them. It is very unsafe for me to be riding outside of the bike lane into the traffic on Beacon Hill Road and on Bellevue Boulevard when they're not being enforced. So my concern is you're adding more bike lanes without any enforcement on Beacon Hill Road when people are going 50 miles an hour down that hill. I'm very concerned about the safety of us on bikes.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. It's a very valid concern, and I'll bring it up with the police enforcement office for parking with them directly, to try to make sure those existing bike lanes are better enforced.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions or comments? Please feel free to raise your hand. Okay, Angelique. Go ahead, Angelique.
Sorry, I was muted. Could we go back for a second to Quander Road? And I know that particular area had a higher amount of parking, I think, based on the consultant going out there and taking the survey. I wanted to point out, what I've heard is that there's a lot of commercial parking there, and there's that dealership there that also has some of their overflow parked vehicles. Were there any notes from the consultant when they did the survey or any personal observations from FCDOT team when they went out there to take a look at it? What types of vehicles are being parked there?
Right, and we were aware of that. So the consultant really just recorded the raw data, just how many vehicles were counted in each of these parking bays. But what I noticed when looking at those data, was that like the percentage of vehicles kind of remained remained the same throughout the day with like a couple of exceptions, which is a good indicator that those vehicles are just kind of sitting there.
Okay, so that's what we thought. So, okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
And if anyone else have any questions or comments, please feel free to raise your hand.
Not seeing any other questions. So I think we can go ahead and wrap up there. But again, thank you so much for joining tonight. Here are the links for submitting feedback. And have a great evening.
Thank you all so much.